Right.
And that state of being, if you like, constitutes the person's, as it were, their fundamental delusion. The way they see the world, in as much as they see it not how it actually is.
Sounds quite challenging. Fundamental delusion. We're all living in a fundamental delusion, I guess is what you're suggesting, or most of us anyway.
Well, coming back to non-dual consciousness, what stands in the way of non-dual consciousness is the illusion, or one of the fundamental illusions, is that you are a separate self. Okay, from that fundamental illusion will flow all kinds of reactions and compensations. Okay, so starting from that very basic place, I am separate, comes the notion I have to struggle. If I don't struggle, I won't survive. Yeah. Comes the notion of what do people think of me? I must act and be in a certain way. So from that fundamental delusion, a whole number of sort of links in the chain flow from that until you get as it were, from point A to point A to B to D to C to E to, and you come from this point here, but there's a whole...
There's repercussions along the way,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's repercussions. So the point is to retrace the route from here back to the fundamental state, which is a belief. And this is where it links with non-dual consciousness, doesn't it? Which is a belief that you are separate. So one might say that's the most fundamental belief, but then we must look at how that particular belief takes shape in you, or in me, or in someone else. Yeah. And that is the specific. That is that the form of that belief becomes more specific in a particular individual. And that's what homeopaths do. They look at that very specific state in that person. But underlying it, it's coming back to this idea of identity, of becoming identified with something. It's not who who are you really? You're the spaciousness, you're the emptiness, you're the flow of energy.
You used this term, I'm just looking at my notes because I've forgotten what it was in your book, which I hadn't heard before, which was holons. It just reminded me of that, what you were saying now. It's like a holen, from what I understand, from what I've read in your book, is basically something is a separate entity in itself, but it's also aware that it's part of something bigger. So it might be, take this plant, we pretend it's real rather than plastic. So you've got the leaf, and the leaf at one level of consciousness thinks it's a leaf, and then it's part of a stem, and then it's part of a, well, it looks very plastic, it's part of a trunk, and it's part of a whole thing, and that's part of maybe a forest if it's in a forest, and that's part of a estate, etc. Yeah. And the human beings are the same. Where you should explain this.
Well, the notion of I think originally comes from Arthur Koestler, and it was picked up by Ken Wilber. So Ken Wilber talks about it a lot, and he talks about nested hierarchies of holons. So it's a fundamental law of manifestation that everything that exists contains smaller parts within itself, but is also part of something bigger.
Right.
So organs in the body consist of cells, so they are already a holon, right? But the organ itself is also part of something larger, the body. Or you might say that atoms consist of subatomic particles. So that's a holon. But an atom is also a part of a larger holon, a molecule. And a molecule could be part of a cell, and a cell could be part of a body, just in the way you've just said. And one of the interesting things about Holon is that there are two fundamental drives. The Holon has the drive to be itself,
Right.
to maintain itself, but also to maintain itself as part of something larger. Okay, so if that balance gets upset, say, take us as human beings, we need to be ourselves. We need to have our own integrity and just be who we are. But also we exist, say, in a larger group, say a family, which we also need to be part of that. And so there's that kind of, or it could be like a tension.
Well, there is a real dilemma sometimes,
Yes,
isn't there?
exactly. That tension could become a dilemma.
If there aren't enough resources, there's me and there's the family and there's the village and what else, there's limited resources. You've got priorities, and am I the priority, or is...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And or on the psychological level, the family might want you to be other than who you are. So your being part of the family is kind of trying to push you into another shape. And yet you need to be part of the family for your survival and so on, but you also need to be yourself. So it's really coming back to this idea of being yourself, of this natural integrity that we have. And wellness is when this integrity can come about, and that everything which is, well, that comes back to the question of everything that needs to be included. And particularly the things that have been shut out or denied, because these are the things that make trouble for us.
So when we get sick, ill, whatever, we have pain, is that always to do, from a homeopathic point of view, is that always to do with a loss at one level of contact with the whole, with consciousness as a big picture rather than us as individuals, or are there other factors that affect it, like genetic factors, that we don't necessarily have any kind of personal control over?
Yeah, there are many levels. There's the genetic, the ancestral level, inherited patterns. But you might say that those inherited patterns are already things that have been building up from other individuals in the ancestral line who haven't kind of sorted out their integrity, have somehow lost their integrity, or their integrity has been compromised in some way. So that gets kind of passed on. That's a package that you already pick up. It's like karma, I suppose. So we come in with a certain amount of ancestral tendencies. And, those can be quite extreme in some cases. So that's the kind of stuff that you have to work with. But looking at the very biggest picture of it, yes, you can say that it's always a loss of contact, a loss of connection with what we truly are. But there are many, many levels to that. There are many things defining how we believe ourselves to be. But at the root of this is the false ideas that you have about yourself.
Yes. No.
That is the driving engine of the whole thing. If that weren't so, then homeopathy couldn't work, because homeopathy uses these potentized remedies which work very much on the sort of energetic level. So that must mean that the source of the problem, if those remedies work, which they do, then that must mean the source of the problem is on the energetic level.